"Sir, this section is reserved tonight. You'll need to move to the bar area." The host said it flatly, not as a request, while Andre Coleman stood at the edge of the dining room with his 6-year-old daughter's hand in his, a small gift bag from the toy store still swinging from his other wrist. Nora had been talking about this dinner for 2 weeks straight. Her 7th birthday, the one night a year she got to pick the restaurant. And she had picked this one because the menu had a picture of a chocolate cake with sparklers on it. Andre had a reservation. He had confirmed it twice. None of that mattered in the next 90 seconds because a man 3 tables away had decided he did not want them anywhere near his party. And the restaurant had decided to agree with him. What happened after that would end with a grown man in a $5,000 suit, standing in the middle of a dining room with no argument left to make. A general manager rewriting the seating chart in front of 40 witnesses, and a stranger walking out from the kitchen who recognized Andre's face the moment he saw it, because he had seen it once before, through the shattered windshield of a burning car. If stories like this keep you watching, subscribe, because there's more coming. Andre Coleman had learned, in the 4 years since his wife left, that consistency was the only thing he could offer his daughter that nobody could take away from her. He worked as a site supervisor for a commercial construction firm, 6 days a week most months, and he had built his entire schedule around one non-negotiable rule. He picked Nora up from school himself, every day, no exceptions, regardless of what was happening on a job site. He was 39, broad through the shoulders, with a quiet way of moving through a room that made people assume he was calmer than he actually felt most days. He did not talk much about the years before the construction job, the 12 he had spent as a firefighter, the last 4 of those as a captain, before a warehouse collapse had taken most of the hearing in his left ear and put an end to a career he had loved more than almost anything except his daughter. He did not miss the uniform, most days. He missed the version of himself that had known exactly what he was for. The certainty of a job where the value of what you did was never in question, only whether you could get there in time. Nora did not know any of this in detail. She knew her father had been a firefighter once, the way children know facts about their parents without fully absorbing their weight. And she knew he still woke up early out of habit. And she knew he made her waffles every Sunday shaped badly on purpose because she thought it was funny. The apartment they shared was small, 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. But Andre kept it clean and warm, and full of the specific small rituals that made a place feel like it belonged to the people inside it, rather than simply housing them. A wall of Nora's drawings taped up in the hallway, updated every few weeks as new ones replaced old favorites. A shelf in the living room with exactly 1 photograph of her mother, kept there not out of bitterness, but because Andre had decided early on that erasing her would only teach Nora that love could simply be subtracted from a life without consequence. And he did not want that lesson taught in his house. He worked hard, harder than the job strictly required most days, because over time paid for things like art supplies and the occasional dinner out, and because staying busy kept certain memories from the old job at a manageable distance. Tonight was her birthday, and she had chosen Bellamy's, a restaurant downtown with white tablecloths and a chandelier she had seen in a photo online, and Andre had made the reservation 3 weeks in advance, put on the one blazer he owned, and driven them both downtown with the particular focus of a father, determined to give his daughter exactly the night she had been imagining. They arrived 8 minutes early. The host, a young man in his 20s named Colin, confirmed the reservation without incident, said their table would be ready shortly, and asked them to wait near the entrance. Nora spent the wait examining the chandelier with total absorption, counting the crystal drops out loud under her breath, occasionally tugging her father's sleeve to point out a new detail. Andre watched her, with the specific quiet happiness that had no name, the kind that simply sat in his chest without needing to announce itself. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Colin returned twice to say the table was almost ready, each time with a slightly tighter smile than before. and on his third return, he was accompanied by a man in his 50s, wearing a dark suit that fit with the particular precision of clothing, bought specifically to communicate authority. The man introduced himself as Preston Hale, and something about the way he said his own name suggested he expected it to mean something to whoever heard it. He owned 3 buildings within 2 blocks of the restaurant, sat on the board of a foundation that funded the city's largest arts gala, and had been dining at Bellamy's every Thursday for 11 years. A fact the restaurant's owner had mentioned to him personally on more than one occasion. Tonight he had reserved the entire section along the west windows for a small private dinner with 2 business partners. He was courting for a deal that had taken him 4 months to arrange, and he had specifically requested through the general manager that the section remain quiet and undisturbed. He looked at Andre, at the blazer that did not quite match the rest of the room, at the small girl beside him holding a gift bag, and made a decision in under 3 seconds that he would spend the rest of the night refusing to walk back. "I don't think this is going to work out," he said, addressing Colin rather than Andre, as though Andre were a logistical problem rather than a person standing directly in front of him. "Can we move them somewhere else? Somewhere further from my table?" Andre kept his voice level. "We have a reservation," he said. 8 o'clock, under Coleman. I confirmed it this afternoon." Preston did not look at him when he answered. "I'm sure that's true," he said, still speaking past Andre to Colin. "I'm just saying this section was requested to be kept quiet tonight, and I'd appreciate it if that request were honored." Nora looked up at her father, sensing without yet understanding that something in the conversation had shifted into a register she did not like. Andre put a hand lightly on her shoulder, kept his expression calm for her benefit, and looked at Colin. "Is there a problem with our table?" he asked. Colin, visibly uncomfortable, glanced toward the back of the restaurant where the general manager could be seen watching from near the kitchen pass, and said that management was reviewing the seating arrangement and would have an update shortly. It was, Andre understood immediately, a sentence designed to avoid saying the actual thing happening in front of him. The general manager, a woman named Renata Vance, arrived a few minutes later with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to smoothing over friction between valuable customers and less valuable ones, and it took her exactly 1 look at the situation to determine which category Andre belonged to. "Mr. Hale is one of our most valued guests," she said, without quite looking at Andre directly. "I'd like to offer you a table near the bar instead. Same menu. Wonderful view of the open kitchen. We just need to accommodate a private request for tonight's window section." Andre asked calmly whether the reservation system had assigned him to that section for a reason. Renata said something about availability and configuration that did not actually answer the question, and Andre understood, the way he had understood plenty of things over the years without anyone needing to say them out loud, that the honest answer was considerably simpler than the one being offered. Nora, still holding her gift bag, looked between the adults with the careful attention of a child cataloging something wrong that she could not yet name, and asked quietly if they were still having her birthday dinner. Renata glanced down at Nora for the first time, and something in her expression flickered. Not quite guilt, but an awareness that the conversation had an audience she had not accounted for. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, in a voice pitched for a child rather than a decision. "We'll get you a lovely table." Andre did not raise his voice. He simply said, "The reservation is under my name for a table in this section, and I'd like to know why a request from another guest overrides a confirmed booking." Preston, listening from a few feet away, answered before Renata could. "Because some requests matter more than others," he said, with the flat confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone whose opinion he valued. "That's how this works." The dining room had gone quieter around them, not silent, but noticeably attentive, the particular hush that settles over a room full of people pretending to look at their menus while listening to every word. A couple at the nearest table had stopped their own conversation entirely. A server near the kitchen door had paused mid-step, tray balanced, watching. Andre looked at Preston for a long moment. "You paid for a quiet section," he said. "You didn't pay for the right to decide who eats in this restaurant." Preston's expression hardened, the look of a man unaccustomed to being addressed without deference. "You have no idea what tonight's dinner is worth to this restaurant," he said, "or to this city for that matter. I sit on 3 boards that fund half the cultural programming downtown. I don't think you understand the position you're putting Renata in by making this difficult." Andre said, evenly, "I'm not making anything difficult. I made a reservation 3 weeks ago for my daughter's birthday. I'm asking to be seated at the table I reserved. That's the entire difficulty here. And it isn't mine." Nora tugged his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but clear enough to carry, "can we just go somewhere else? I don't want everyone looking at us." Andre crouched down to her level, kept his voice warm and steady, the voice reserved specifically for keeping the world's disorder from becoming her problem. "We can, baby," he said, "but I want you to understand something first. We didn't do anything wrong tonight. Sometimes staying and saying that plainly matters more than leaving quietly, even when leaving would be easier." Nora considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things her father told her, and nodded, though her eyes kept drifting toward Preston with the wary caution of a child assessing a threat she did not yet have words for. A woman at a nearby table, seated with what appeared to be a client of her own, had stopped pretending not to listen several minutes earlier. She was in her 60s, dressed simply, and she watched the exchange with an expression that had moved steadily from discomfort toward something closer to open disapproval. When Preston made his comment about some requests mattering more than others, she set down her fork with enough deliberateness that the sound carried. "Excuse me," she said, "to no one in particular, and everyone at once. I've been sitting here for 10 minutes, listening to a grown man argue with a child's birthday dinner." Preston turned toward her, visibly irritated at the interruption. "This doesn't concern you," he said. The woman held his gaze without flinching. "I'm a paying customer in this restaurant." "Same as you," she said. "And I'd like my dinner to continue, without listening to you decide who's allowed to sit near you." A man at the table behind her murmured something in agreement, and 2 more heads turned in Andre's direction, not with the earlier curiosity of spectators, but with something that had started to resemble solidarity. Renata, sensing the room's temperature shifting further away from where she needed it, glanced toward the kitchen with the particular urgency of someone hoping for an intervention she did not yet have. Renata, sensing the situation sliding further from her control, attempted a compromise. "What if we set up a lovely table for you and your daughter in the private alcove near the wine room?" she said. "Very intimate, very special for a birthday." Andre asked whether that alcove was in fact available for the reservation he had made, or whether it was simply the least visible option in the building. Renata did not answer directly, which told him everything the silence needed to. "I'd like to speak with the owner," Andre said. Renata said the owner was not on site tonight. Andre asked who was authorized to resolve a dispute over a confirmed reservation in the owner's absence. Renata said that authority currently rested with her, and with Mr. Hale's standing as a longtime patron factored into the decision. Preston, apparently satisfied that the matter was tilting his direction, allowed himself a small, tight smile. "I'm sure we can find something acceptable for the gentleman," he said. The word gentleman, delivered with just enough emphasis to make clear he did not fully believe it applied. It was at that moment that a man stepped out from the kitchen doors, drawn by a server who had grown uneasy, watching the confrontation stretch past its 5th minute. He was in his 40s, wearing chef's whites, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who ran his own domain, and rarely needed to raise his voice to be heard in it. His name tag read Marcus Fiore, executive chef, and he crossed the dining room with the particular urgency of a man who had heard enough through the kitchen pass to know something was wrong before he had all the details. He looked at the scene. Renata caught between 2 decisions. Preston standing with his arms crossed, Andre with his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder, and something in his gaze sharpened as it landed on the left side of Andre's neck. where the collar of his shirt had shifted slightly to reveal the edge of an old burn scar, pale and long-heeled, running from just below his ear down toward his collarbone. Marcus stopped walking. He stared at the scar, then at Andre's face, and something crossed his features that had not been there a second earlier. "I know you," Marcus said, his voice quieter than anything else spoken in that dining room all evening. Andre looked at him, uncertain, searching a face he did not immediately place among the thousands he had encountered over 12 years of a job that put him in front of strangers on the worst nights of their lives. 8 years ago, Marcus said, his voice unsteady now. A car went off the ramp on Delacour, into the creek bed. It caught fire before anyone could get the doors open. Andre felt something shift in his chest, a memory surfacing before he had consciously reached for it. There was a kid trapped in the back seat, Marcus continued, 9 years old, my nephew. The fire department got there, and one man went into the water, into the fire, twice, to get him out before the tank went. Second time he went in, the whole back half of the car lit up while he was still inside it. He came out with my nephew and half his own collar burned into his neck. Marcus's voice caught. That was you. I saw your face for 4 seconds through that windshield before you went under the waterline, and I've thought about it more times than I can count. I never got your name. Nobody would tell me. Classified incident report. Some department policy about ongoing investigation. I just knew there was a man out there somewhere who'd walked into fire twice for a boy he'd never met. The dining room had gone completely silent. Renata's hand had come up to her mouth. Preston, for the first time since Andre had arrived, had nothing to say. Andre stood very still, the old scar suddenly feeling heavier under his collar than it had in years. Captain Andre Coleman, he said quietly. Retired now. Injury took most of the hearing in my left ear that same year. Ended the career not long after. Marcus crossed the remaining distance between them, and without asking, without hesitating, pulled Andre into an embrace that had nothing to do with restaurant hierarchy or reservation disputes, and everything to do with 8 years of a debt he had never been able to repay because he had never known who to repay it to. My nephew is 16 now, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. He plays baseball. He's alive because you went back into that car a second time when anyone would have called it done. Andre, uncertain what to do with the weight of a gratitude he had not been braced for, simply said, I'm glad he's okay. That's all I ever wanted out of that night. Renata found her voice first, and it came out smaller than it had at any previous point in the conversation. Mr. Coleman, she said, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Andre looked at her steadily. You didn't need to know who I was to seat me at the table I reserved, he said. That's the part I need you to sit with. Not what you found out 5 minutes ago. What you were willing to do before you knew any of it. Renata had no answer for that, because there wasn't a good one. Only the accumulated weight of a decision that had started the moment she looked at a construction worker's blazer next to a wealthy regular's tailored suit and decided which one mattered more. Preston, who had spent the last several minutes in uncharacteristic silence, attempted to recover some version of his earlier footing. Well, he said, clearing his throat, this certainly changes the context. Andre turned to look at him directly for the first time, since Marcus had spoken. It doesn't change anything, Andre said. I was the same man 5 minutes ago that I am now. The only thing that changed is that you found out something about my past that made you comfortable treating me like a person. That's not a compliment to me. That's a problem with how you were deciding who deserved a table in the first place. Preston's mouth opened and then closed without producing a sound. The first time all evening, he had failed to find something to say. Marcus turned to Renata. Give them the best table in the house, he said. Window section, obviously. And the birthday cake is on me. Whatever she wants," he added, crouching slightly to look at Nora, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, careful eyes. "Is it your birthday?" he asked her. Nora nodded, still a little uncertain of the sudden shift in the room's temperature. 7, she said. "That's a big one," Marcus said, smiling at her with the easy warmth of a man whose evening had just been given a shape he hadn't expected, but was grateful for. "We're going to make sure tonight is exactly what you pictured." Renata, moving with considerably more urgency than she had shown at any earlier point, personally walked them to the window table, the one Preston had reserved the entire section to protect, and pulled out Nora's chair herself. Preston remained standing near the host stand for a long moment, his business partners watching him with expressions that suggested the story of this evening was not going to end the way he had planned when he made his reservation. One of them, a younger man who had said almost nothing throughout the entire exchange, leaned over and murmured something to the other that made them both glance toward Andre's table with a discomfort neither bothered to hide. The deal Preston had spent 4 months arranging had been built in part on the impression he wanted to leave that evening, an impression of a man whose word carried weight and whose standards were simply the standards everyone else eventually adopted. Watching him stammer through an apology to a stranger he had tried to have removed from a restaurant was not the impression either partner had been expecting to take away from the night, and the silence between them as they returned to their own table said more than either was willing to put into words. Preston approached Andre once more before returning to his own table. "I was out of line," he said, the words arriving stiffly, like a man unaccustomed to producing them. "I should have honored your reservation, regardless of anything else." Andre looked at him for a moment. "You should have," he agreed. "Not because of what I used to do, because it was already the right thing to do before you knew any of that." Preston nodded slowly, and something in his expression suggested the distinction had actually landed, even if it had taken an unlikely coincidence to make it land at all. Dinner that night unfolded exactly the way Nora had pictured it for 2 weeks. Chocolate cake with sparklers arriving to a small round of applause from nearby tables who had pieced together enough of the earlier commotion to understand what they were celebrating. She blew out the candles, opened the gift bag to find a set of art supplies she had been wanting for months, and spent the rest of the meal narrating an elaborate story about a dragon she intended to draw the moment they got home, completely unbothered by anything that had happened before the cake arrived, the way children recover from disruption once the adults around them have restored the shape of the evening they were promised. Andre watched her talk, felt the tension of the last hour finally loosen out of his shoulders, and allowed himself the specific relief of a father who had managed to protect the night without needing to raise his voice to do it. On the drive home, Nora was quiet for a while, working through something in the careful, unhurried way she worked through most things. "Daddy," she said eventually, "was that man mean because of me?" Andre glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "No, baby," he said. "He was mean because he decided he already knew everything about us before he knew anything at all. That's not about you. That's a mistake he was making, and it would have been the same mistake no matter who was standing there instead of us." Nora considered this. "But then, the chef guy knew you from before," she said, "and everything got better. Does that mean it only got fixed because you used to be a fireman?" Andre thought about the question the way it deserved to be thought about, the same way he thought about most things his daughter asked him. "It got fixed because Chef Marcus happened to recognize me," he said. "But it should have never needed fixing in the first place. Nobody should have to prove they used to be somebody important to get treated the way everybody deserves to be treated to begin with. I want you to remember that part more than the other part." Nora nodded slowly, filing the answer away with the seriousness she brought to most things her father told her. And then, because she was 7 years old, and the night had run its natural course, asked if they could stop for ice cream even though she had just eaten an entire slice of birthday cake. Andre laughed. Actually laughed. The sound loosening something in his chest that had been tight since the moment Preston Hale first looked at him, and decided he did not belong. "Sure, baby," he said. "Whatever you want tonight." He thought about the evening often in the weeks that followed, not with anger, which had never been the feeling he carried longest, but with a plain, clear-eyed understanding of what had actually happened and what it meant. Renata called him personally 2 days later, an apology delivered without an audience this time, along with a small note explaining that she had spoken to the restaurant's owner about the incident, and that staff would be receiving training on how reservations were to be honored regardless of who else was in the room. Andre accepted the apology without making more of it than it was. What mattered more to him was smaller and quieter than any formal gesture. The fact that his daughter had watched her father hold his ground without raising his voice, had watched a room full of strangers eventually see him clearly, and had learned, without being told directly, that dignity was not something you had to earn by revealing what you used to be. It was something you were owed simply for showing up as yourself. Some nights, the measure of a man is not how loudly he defends himself, but how steadily he protects the people who are watching him do it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming.